All right, my Star Wars marathon continues. I'm almost to the end now of The Force Awakens, a movie that I really didn't like that much at first, but over time and repeat viewings, it's grown on me a lot. I can't help but think that some people who should not be named, possibly even you who's watching this, might be jumping to opinions about any of these new Star Wars movies too quickly. They're not individual things, they all exist within a greater context. And I do highly recommend watching all the movies as they are now in chronological order, episodes 1 through 3, then Solo, then Rogue One, then episodes 4 through 8. Solo in particular, I find really kind of helps anchor these movies a lot. And also, after watching it, and especially the way it plays out in progression, there's more parallels between Rey and Han Solo in terms of origin than there are between Rey and Luke Skywalker. Rey and Luke have the desert environment in common, and they have the Force user connectivity, but there's been a lot of different Force users in the galaxy. One thing you get while watching the prequels is that all these Jedi live sexless lives. You don't have to be someone's kid to be powerful in the Force. There are no Force lineages. The Skywalkers are the first actual lineage of Force users. That at least is described in George Lucas's version of Star Wars, minus whatever was in the books before the prequels were even made. Whatever can be said about Rey, about her being a Mary Sue, can be just as much levied at Anakin, young Anakin, who at the age of 7 is building robots and flying in pod races and is able to fly a fighter craft the first time he gets in it good enough to be able to thread the needle through a gigantic hangar bay and blow up a ship and then escape without being blown up. Sure, he had R2 helping him, but Han Solo, first time he's at the wheel of the Falcon, flies it perfectly. There's precedent set up in both the Disney movies and even in the movies that already existed before Disney ever laid a finger on any of this stuff that coincides perfectly with Rey. Rey does not have to recreate the hero's journey of Luke Skywalker because she's not a direct analogy of Luke. She has a few Luke overtones, but she's much more Han Solo's heir. She's an orphan raised by criminal scum who were working her for portions. They both had the same thing. Han Solo might have been stealing and being like a kind of a Victorian orphaned cut purse kind of character. Whereas Rey, desert scavenger, just bringing in junk and stuff she finds that she cleans up and is good enough to convince them that they have a resale value or anything. But in the end, there's much more of a connectivity there than it is with Luke, who was raised by a nice family in a stable environment, comparatively, not having to scramble and not being alone. Both Rey and Han Solo are orphans. So once again, I issue my dare, my double dare, my double dog dare that I shouldn't even have to dare Star Wars fans into doing. We'll watch all 10 movies in a row. You don't have to have it be in one sitting. Obviously, that's probably not even physically possible. 10 movies at 2.5 hours on average each. Yeah, no. I wouldn't recommend that. But watch 1 or 2 a day until you're through them all. And watch them in the actual chronological sequential, not in the order that they were released, but the order that they take place along the timeline. And it might change your opinion of them. I mean, seriously, I really want someone to tell me that after they sat through the first 3 Star Wars movies, that having Solo follow Revenge of the Sith does not make it seem like Solo is the first good one. Yes, it might be a little uneven and not perfect. They're all uneven movies, all of them, every last single one of them. They all have these weird, jarring child things put into the middle of them. And with the first part, they have this weird medieval seriousness to them. They've always been this kind of jumbled mess of things. That's just part of what makes Star Wars Star Wars. I will say, watching episode 1 again, this time Jar Jar really kind of felt like some silly little cartoon character for babies that would just kind of pop up on the edge of the screen and just zip through real quick in the middle of some serious conversation. And that's a little annoying and distracting. But luckily, he realized that the fans were not into that, and he dialed it way the hell back. Jar Jar in episodes 2 and 3 was hardly the worst thing about either of those movies. But for some reason, everyone took him so damn personally. That you take all these movies way too personally. I'm no more or less a Star Wars fan than anyone else. But for some reason, I'm not of a mindset where I feel like I somehow own it because I've had my own thoughts about it. Oh my God, yes, of course I would have done all these things differently. I would have done the prequels in a different order, and I would have done the sequels differently. But I'm not George Lucas, and I don't own the shit, so it doesn't fucking matter. Anyone can armchair quarterback movie plot lines. It's absolutely worthless. And in the end, all I know is the last, 10 months now, since The Last Jedi came out, it's just been this septic tank of an ongoing conversation. Like, none of y'all can be talked down. You made up your minds about these movies before you even fucking walked into them. There's no way to have any rational discussion. Most of you should not have opinions about these movies yet. You should wait a couple of viewings, space them out. Your point of view on them will change. And watching them all together as in one big thing will alter your perspective. And probably needs to be done every time a new Star Wars movie comes out, especially if takes place somewhere previous in between the big chapter jumps. Then you should watch them all in proper sequence to kind of get the real picture. The Last Jedi is the 10th episode, not the 8th episode. They didn't put in episode numbers for Solo, and they don't have an episode number for Rogue One. I think ultimately, if they make another Star Wars story set in that time period, we should call it the Prelude Trilogy. You have the prequel trilogy, the Prelude Trilogy, the classic trilogy, the sequel trilogy. And we're going to have some movies set in between the classics and the sequels at some point. Not until the sequel trilogy is finished, I would hope. And that's another thing. In terms of, before I even get into watching it, having already gotten this deep, I'm thinking ahead. Rian Johnson just basically stalled everything. The status quo at the end of that movie is a little bit behind to where they leave off here, which thematically is not that much different from the end of Empire Strikes Back. And virtually all the major questions that J.J. Abrams in his little mystery box thing had set up in The Force Awakens to be answered weren't answered either way in The Last Jedi. How the hell does Kylo Ren possibly know who Rey's parents are one way or the other? Any information about Snoke can still be doled out. We can still at least find out about him posthumously. He could still turn out to be goddamn Plagueis. And it's already been hinted, in dialogue from Sidious after Anakin falls and pledges himself. He's like, well, only one person has ever discovered the trick for life after death, but if we work together, I'm sure we'll figure it out. Which is part of my whole thing of like midway through episode 3, all three of the main characters just become retarded. Anyway, though, it's very possible that if they do decide to just say that Snoke is Plagueis, then he can come back. Luke Skywalker does not have to be dead. There's actually really, if you watch it, there's no real good reason for him to have died. He was a little exhausted briefly after doing a force projection, but then he got his shit back together, started seeing the sunset of a different world, his home world, and then he disappeared. Instead of dying, it could be very possible that Luke Skywalker just teleported his ass back to Tatooine. And we might find out that, because some of the weird rumors that I'm hearing about Episode 9 are shit about Luke Skywalker yanking a damn Star Destroyer out of the sky and other shit. The biggest problem Episode 9 has is that the thematic thing they were doing with these movies of having one kind of be about Han and one be about Luke, and the third one was going to focus a little bit on Leia, was badly ordered since Leia died, and they should have had her be the focus of two. Or they should have stopped mid-production and changed a few things and have at least have given her character a clear-cut death scene instead of whatever thing we're going to get of lost footage from this movie. I mean, how much could there possibly be? And trying to find ways to contextualize it in whatever story they're telling now. But J.J. Abrams is going to have a chance to still answer all the questions that he set up. Nothing that Rian Johnson did completely negates that stuff. Luke can still be alive. Snoke can still be alive. Rey can still turn out to be somebody. Although, like I say, you got the parallels between her and Solo and the fact that there are tons of powerful Jedi who did not have Jedi parents. Mace Windu did not come from a long line of Jedi Windus. Yoda, there's nothing to indicate that Yoda's parents were great, powerful Force users. People attuned and able to manipulate and get in touch with the Force just exist to varying degrees of power depending upon their midichlorian count, which at some point these movies might need to bring back up. I'm sure I'll have more to say. I might as well save it for the next one. So, I'll see you when we get to the controversial one. When we get to the dark side.